Hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you today. I want you to meet me on Blue Sky, the santitajackson.bsky.social page. santitajackson.bsky.social. I'm on X at Santita J, at Santita J. I am also on Facebook Santita Jackson and Friends. Facebook/Santita Jackson and Friends. And then Snowman beat everybody today. I see you. I see you. I see you. What you told Bernadette? You said I beat you. I beat you, Bernadette. Bernadette, peace. Snowman, I see you. How you doing, sweetheart? Sending you so much love today. We've got a lot to talk about. We're looking at the sixth day, by the time as we're recording this show, the sixth day of these demonstrations, these protests in Los Angeles. But actually, there are demonstrations that are breaking out all over the country. Chicago, New York, all over the country, not just in big cities, mid-sized cities. And I get the sense that this has been the spark that has ignited something else. People are very, very anxious about Social Security, about health care, Medicaid, and Medicare. More than 40% of American children are born using Medicaid. 40%, 41% to be exact. What about SNAP programs? What about WIC? What about the public education system as the education department is being eliminated, being phased out? What does that mean? Hey, easy peasy. How you doing, Paula? Hello, Lewis. So I think we're looking at an American public, quite frankly, who are afraid. I don't think it could have been said any better than what was said by a constituent at Senator Joni Ernst's town hall meeting. This person shouted, "People will die." She callously replied, "Oh, we're all going to die anyway." And then she made her mea culpa, her apology, from a graveyard. And we have more and more people who are getting tuned into Gaza. Yeah, I mean, what does all of that mean? What does all of that mean? We have Veterans for Peace, World Beyond War. So many people are coming together and who are fasting. And more people are launching sympathy fasts in the United States and all over the world. I think there's something else that is going on in California and in Chicago and in New York and all around the country. And I have a lot of questions, and I hope that they will get you to thinking too. Modern day movements really have used as their inspiration the modern civil rights movement. Of course, inspired by Gandhi, nonviolent. It really flowered in another way in the United States because this is the biggest, richest empire that the world has ever known. And the people who have absolutely been under the boot, racialized into not even non human status, are Black people. And Black people have fought back continually, and we've won. And we brought so many people with us. So, coming through the movement, I'm always very, very suspicious when I see protests inspired by the civil rights movement that dissolve into violence. Something about that just doesn't ring true. The only march that Dr. King led in his 13 years of ministry that dissolved into violence was the last march that he actually led before his assassination, before he was murdered. And it turns out that several of the young Black men who disrupted the march, they were affiliated with our intelligence agencies. One, ironically enough, had gone to Dr. King's alma mater, Morehouse College. And fast forward several decades later, when he was asked about his possible affiliation with one of the alphabet agencies, Amy Goodman asked on Democracy Now! He averred, he didn't just aver, he became very anxious. And it was very unsettling to me to see that. But there you go. So, what is going on here? Is it just about immigration and migrants? And let's be clear. I know this might upset some people, but here it goes. A lot of the people who are being put out, these are, let's be very clear, these are Spanish speaking indigenous people. Many, they call California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, they call it El Norte. That's where they're from, everybody. So you got to think about that. Yes, we have our laws for sure, but the first law breakers were the British and the Spaniards. They were the illegal migrants, Kathleen, Colleen Rowley. This is so ironic. FBI whistleblower, blow that whistle. How about that? I mean, because, cause honestly, because that's what I see. That is what I see. When I'm looking at the president who has deployed these troops in Los Angeles against the wishes of Mayor Karen Bass, Governor Gavin Newsom. In 1992, the governor invited the president, asked President Bush, please federalize the National Guard. We need help because you had protests and riots, quite frankly, all over Los Angeles, all over the city. That is not what's happening here. The last time a president unilaterally went past a governor was in 1965 with LBJ, when he went past Governor Wallace's wishes and said, we're going to desegregate these schools now. So what does this mean? What does this mean? Hey, Carol Soskin, Mike Burries, and Lee Williams, how you doing? And Paula, sending you all so much love. Snowman, you were on first. That's right. That's right. You were on first today. So talk to me. I see that it just seems like something else is going on here. There's much more at play here than the migrants. Not that that's not enough, Colleen Rowley, because that's a lot.
Yeah. I'll give you my opinion, and I've had this idea in my head for some time and it goes back to, a lot of people who have warned that waging of war has a lot of costs. But one of the major costs, because people are made to believe that they are waging war on the so-called others. Okay, not on themselves, not in their own country, etc. So you scapegoat a distinct group, usually in a country that most of the people in this country don't even know where the other country is. There was a famous country song that said, "I don't know the difference between Iraq and Iran." So if you can pick a place far away and say they're the enemy, guess what? You can coalesce your own people. The problem with that is that it never works because, and especially if you wage a perpetual war and you keep changing who the enemy is, which is what we've probably changed the enemy a dozen times since 9/11, to the point now where Al Qaeda, the terrorists, we're funding them in some places and supporting them and putting them in power in places. So the whole thing is a more like Smedley Butler, the famous general, said, war is a racket, but it's worse than a racket in fooling people, because what happens is it blows back. The war and the violence migrates home. And, I've said this in connection with the epidemic of mass shootings and other mass bombings. And now people are using cars to drive into protests, etc. But it also manifests in that there's an angst, there's an increasing angst in this country. And, some people call it mass depression. I think that's not, we have higher levels of suicide than ever before, and drug use, and our mortality our longevity has dropped. Even our longevity has dropped in this country. Like you say, we thought we were the most wealthy empire in the world, to the point where we should control every other country and tell them what to do and install leaders that would only kowtow to us because we were so powerful. Kind of like we actually thought we were the Roman Empire, I think, again. But it's when our own lifespan is going down. And this has happened in other places in the world. In the Soviet Union, when they lost their when the USSR collapsed, and we put Yeltsin in, an alcoholic leader. He was really bad for the Russia. He was really bad. He allowed oligarchs to flourish in Russia. Guess what? Their longevity almost dropped 10 years. So they went down. I mean, maybe what?
Their life expectancy?
Life expectancy. That's right. The average life expectancy, and maybe it wasn't quite 10 years, but it was a good 8 or 9 years, and in very short amount of time. And it was because, go back to what happened in that country, and so people started drinking. They got forms of mass depression. And I think that this larger angst, if you will, or again, unease and worry and all of the polarization that has even split up families. Families members are not talking with each other. The kind of the community, the fact that it's not like the 50s anymore with community. There's a lot of things going on here, but I would attribute a lot of this to war blowback. And it's because the costs of war, there's a lot of things a lot of different things. I mean, people will say, oh, that's too simplistic, but actually some of our scholars warn this even at the time the United States started to first engage in wars of aggression on Iraq, made up pretexts. There were people, even in our foreign policy, that warned that this would have these serious consequences later on. And I think that's one of the reasons. Now, when a protest starts, there's a lot of aspects to this, but when people are just like non-violently protesting, like our Veterans for Peace and Fasters Against Genocide did this morning. So we were, I mean, honestly, I'm 70, and I think most of the people there were over my age. And then there were 2 veterans, Vietnam veterans, in the veterans home, and one of them was on hospice. He really doesn't probably have long to live. His dying wish was to get out in the sun for a few hours. He wanted to put his feet in the grass. He hasn't been able to put his feet in the grass for a long time, and he wanted to speak out against the genocide in Gaza with fellow Veterans for Peace. So we came with signs. They were able to wheel him out across the parking lot, but his wheelchair was heavy and it couldn't get quite out of the parking lot. Guess what? Oh my gosh. Again, we're a completely nonviolent protest. The veterans home eventually sent their security out, and then they called the police. And we had these police officers acting very authoritarian, saying, you can't be in the parking lot. Well, we were 2 feet in the parking lot because his wheelchair couldn't get up. And we thought to ourselves, are they going to arrest a Vietnam vet in hospice? Because, it's incredible. But having been law enforcement and having trained law enforcement on constitutional law for 13, 14 years, I think I can put myself in their heads of the police. They now see things as a war. And you can see this in Los Angeles now when violence breaks out. There, and it could get worse. It could become, as happened during Vietnam, it could become Kent State and Jackson State, where actually the National Guard lost their cool, if you will, and shot innocent protesters. And the more, I will say, the more Trump equates with what they're doing. I saw Kristi Noem, the Department of Homeland Security, who doesn't have too many IQ points working at the same time. She didn't even know what habeas corpus was. She was asked habeas corpus, which is your right to a trial and to know what the charges are, and she said, "Oh no, it's the way to deport people." Unbelievable. So she's in charge of this. Can you imagine? And Trump and others are starting to equate protest, plain, and again, civil rights protest. So, it's historically what, people did in the civil rights era. They go marching down the street with signs, or they even stand like we were standing on public property. And it's for a cause, but it is not insurrection. It's not rebellion against the state. For Trump to invoke the laws, the National Guard, to call out the National Guard on his own without a governor asking for help, which happened with Rodney King. That they said that was the last time, 1992, Rodney King beating, and when he got off, there was going to be some amount of trouble, and so the governor then called for the National Guard. Here in Minnesota, our Governor Walz called for the National Guard after George Floyd was killed. Okay, those examples occurred, but Trump is doing this against the wishes of the governor. And how does he do this legally? He's trying to say, and they're starting to say, that this isn't a protest. This is insurrection, violent insurrection or / rebellion against the state, because that's what he has to do. That law, I think it's from 1878 or something, is the last insurrection law, I think. And so there's some terms of art in that law. And he has to say that it's insurrection in order for him to call out, and of course, the Marines, which otherwise violates the posse comitatus law. And so what they're trying to do right now, they're saying that the military officers are not supposed to be armed. They can have ammunition. Actually, they are armed, but their guns are not supposed to contain ammunition. They're not supposed to be loaded. And so the only apparently they were.
So what is the point?
Yeah, can you imagine being a National Guard? So
No.
Okay, you have a gun like Barney Fife. You have a gun that has no bullet. And in theory, you're supposed to be able to put the bullets in case you see, somebody get shot next to you or something like that, obviously. Now, the fear is, and I would tend to agree, I don't agree with Gavin Newsom on a lot of things, just to put the record straight. I did not agree at all with his COVID mandate, where he was forcing people in California to get the shot, and he was partying in a restaurant with all his friends. I mean, I do not agree with Gavin Newsom. However, I think he's right. I think he's right about the fact that this Trump is usurping powers. Let's hope that the courts can kind of roll this back, because this doesn't seem right. That the protest in Los Angeles and other places, especially all over the country now, because it may spark wider protests on a lot of issues. Absolutely, a lot of different issues, because people are kind of angry about things, and I would say even more so than being angry, they're worried. You didn't mention, when you went through the various things that people are worried about, There's one more big thing that people ought to be worried about. And Tulsi Gabbard, the director of National Intelligence, DNI, gave 2 days ago, said, we are on the brink of nuclear war. She said, and this is also because of what's gone on with Israel and Iran, and especially, I would say, Israel trying to provoke the United States into war with Iran. And Israel is, there's talk of them using nuclear bombs. And so that's another thing. I mean, I will admit, I am very nervous, especially for the grandchildren and all the young generation. I'm 70. I guess I've had my life, but this is terrible. The fact is, our leaders is such a misnomer calling them leaders, because they remind me of a lot like Barney Fife, a kind of the quintessential example of ignorance and arrogance. That's a deadly combination, ignorance and arrogance. And they are not doing smart things, not at all.
They're doing this right now. And one has to wonder if you're walking around, or we're being told, and so they're being told that their guns are not loaded. I don't understand the point of that. and I'm trying to figure out how our troops fight wars. That's what they do. How are they supposed to react if a situation becomes confrontational? That is very concerning. And when I hear the president say that the military parade, which is coming up this weekend, right? He said if there's any dissent, any protests, they will be met with tremendous force. Is that what a president is supposed to say, Colleen Rowley?
That just reinforces what I said. This equating of dissent, and basically that's First Amendment protected freedom of speech and press. Freedom of speech and press allows dissent. Okay. Even remember the ACLU said, allow the Nazis to march in Skokie. You don't have to agree with them, whatever, but they should be allowed as long as they're nonviolent and they just march down the street. Okay. So that was an extreme example, I suppose. But yes, if you're protesting the wars and the genocide, again, they're equating this, first of all, with anti-Semitism, hate crimes, and then they're equating it with insurrection to the point where they can bring in the military. If this is not our wars come home, I don't know what is.
When you say, to your point, Dr. King said some years ago, 60 years ago or so, that the bombs we drop overseas would explode at home. And you've talked about this before. Matt Ho, our friend, talks about moral injury. And you have a lot of that. I mean, you have our veterans who are not getting the care that they need and deserve in the hospitals, not because they have staff that do not care. They're woefully underfunded and they're understaffed. I mean, we're a country of 340 million people at least. We don't even have 1 million hospital beds.
No.
Which to me, I was talking to a world-renowned healthcare professional, and she said, well, I think the goal is for people not to get sick. I said, but they do. Having 980,000 hospital beds for 340 million people, to me, is patently absurd. So when you see bodies stacked up during a pandemic, yeah, that's going to happen. Because they have no place to go. They're going to be in the hallways. Are you serious? If we had enough beds, we wouldn't have had the psychological trauma of those scenes, perhaps. So my question for you is that, because you are now on a fast, because you are actively engaged, as a lot of people are. They're not fasting, but they are marching, or they're preparing to march. This weekend, when they have these military marches, they have the No Kings movement. We've had Alex Lawson from Social Security Works on to talk about that. I plan to get him on one more time before the week is out, just to talk about No Kings. Because all of this is, of course, falling on President Trump's birthday, and it just seems this is really a lot. I just don't know. I don't know any other way to put it. This is really a lot. You've got to help me to unpack this because you are on what day you have there's a 40-day fast. What day are you on? Because you are in solidarity with the people of Gaza who are starving.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Yeah.
no, they're being starved. Let me
Yeah.
get very let me get
They
very
have a naval blockade and a land blockade, and they are not allowing any food except through the humanitarian, something called Israel Humanitarian, which was a little made up thing. It's the Mossad and the CIA, people who have come to try to get some food from this thing. It's only in one place, so they can try to herd the people all down to the south where it's easier to push them out. And when they've tried to, they've shot them. They shot 30 some people who were just trying to get food. The food
wait,
doesn't, it's not.
because wait a minute, they call them and say that the food is here, right?
Yeah. Well, the food is in one small place.
Mhm.
When the United Nations distributed the food before Israel said, equated the United Nations with terrorism. Oh my God. I mean, I find it hard to believe that so many people fall into this propaganda. These are even the liberals to believe now, because Netanyahu said that the UNRWA, which is a United Nations, it was a group of it took thousands of people to distribute food because they've always had the blockade on. They've had the blockade on for like a decade or more. And so it's hard to distribute that much food to 2 million people. And they had these distribution points all over Gaza. Well, no, now the CIA Mossad controlled one that they made up is in one place way down south. So the people have to go way down there. And they did a few days ago, they shot 30, 40 people trying to get the food, And so, yeah, I mean, going back, I wanted to make a comment on No King's Day, because this ties in with the legal, what I should call it, legal sophistry. There's maybe a better term for it. Lawfare, they called it. So in the law, some lawyers, of course, can always find, think about taxes. Why do you get a tax lawyer if you're Trump? Why do you get a tax lawyer? Is it so that lawyer will tell you to follow the law? No, you get if you're Trump, you get a tax lawyer to find loopholes and creative ways around the law. And so these, and another good term for it is called pettifoggery. It's an old term, pettifogger. It means that you are a shyster, a small time swindler. Okay, so anyway, some lawyers, with Bush, going all the way back to the Bush administration, they came up with Article 2 powers. And they wrote these memos really right after 9/11. John Yoo and Robert Delahunt were the authors, and they wrote a series of memos saying basically that the Bill of Rights was no longer valid because Article 2 says the president is the commander in chief. And since Article 2 says he's a commander in chief, he doesn't have to worry about First Amendment, freedom of press. In fact, didn't have to worry about the Geneva Conventions and the prohibition against torture. There was a whole bunch of these things that they said under Article 2, and that's John Yoo was the kind of the young guy in the Department of Justice who wrote these things. Robert Delahunt was the senior attorney who signed off on them, and no one knew. They were all secret at the time. And Article 2 creates what they call, John Yoo came here later to speak, and I sat in the front row at one of our law schools, and it's called the Imperial Presidency. Now, I'm tying this into No Kings because this is actually what happened after 9/11. And John Yoo, he gave a whole argument about why our president as commander in chief, has to have imperial powers in order that everything, Congress, the judiciary, the Bill of Rights, all of those things no longer are important. In a way, all these old laws, the Insurrection Act and the Espionage Act that are passed in a time of war, because people say, oh, security, I'm scared. We have to have an Espionage Act. We have to put the Japanese Americans in a concentration camp. So during times of war, you will always see these really terrible abuses of power. And then sometimes there is an attempt to create new imperial presidency. It happened right after 9/11. Of course, it also happened with the internment of the Japanese Americans. It happened during the Civil War. Actually, during the Civil War, they put newspaper editors in prison who were against war. So it's happened in all the wars. And I would say
in the United States.
Yes, if you were an editor in a northern newspaper and you wrote something against the Civil War, they went after you. The generals were told under, again, it's more or less imperial presidency powers, Article 2. And actually, what happens afterwards? Okay, so during this time period, nobody really, some people tried to object to Abraham Lincoln's use of these powers. People tried to object. Korematsu was one of the Japanese Americans. He challenged it up to the Supreme Court. He tried to object to the internment without any level of evidence, any level of probable cause, no habeas corpus back when those Japanese Americans were interred. And so, but some people fight against it. They usually lose. Debs during World War I, Debs fought against it, and he ended up going to prison. So you usually lose when it's happening, but guess what? Over time, and this again, these lessons of history are important to remember right now because we are right now going through the worst of it. But you have to know that people are going to come to their senses and things will change. The Korematsu case is a great one because this poor young 20-some-year-old Japanese American, he fought it, the power of the president to say all Japanese Americans in California have to go into a concentration camp, essentially. And he lost. He lost at the Supreme Court. Only 2 Supreme Court judges were on his side, and one of them was Robert Jackson, who was the Nuremberg prosecutor. It's, of course, he knew right from wrong. I mean, Robert Jackson knew that wars of aggression were wrong, and he knew that in putting Japanese Americans in prison camps was wrong too. He was a smart guy, but he died. Robert Jackson died. Korematsu lived a long time. I met him actually at an ACLU conference when he was in his 90s. He died the next year afterwards. But Jackson died not knowing that people would eventually come to their senses. All this time later, what are we, 80 some years later, guess what? Our current Chief Justice, Roberts, has now said, boy, that was wrong. That was a wrong decision. And this happened with the Espionage Act. It's happened with the Insurrection Acts. It always happens that people come out of the war fever afterwards and realize that they should never have done these things. And I even have some hopes that I don't know. I maybe don't have high hopes about the Israelis finally coming to their senses and realizing that killing children and babies and children by saying, oh, they're all Hamas, they'll grow up, they're being trained, so even if we kill them when they're 5, they're going to be trained. I mean, these kinds of unbelievable rationalizations for genocide are unbelievable. But I think that there's a chance many while from now that maybe they'll come out of it. You know, people will learn from this, but it always happens during war fever. And why does it happen? It's because people's emotions, the powers that shouldn't be. I always say the powers instead of the powers that be. I always say the powers that shouldn't be are able essentially to press emotional buttons on people: fear, hate, greed, false pride, and blind loyalty, and they can manipulate large masses of people. The problem with all of this is that it all hurts the people that fall for it. Tulsi Gabbard, in her warning about the fact that we're on the edge of nuclear war, said something that I think was important. I've said it, but I've never heard people really mention it. The many of our so-called leaders, quote unquote leaders, for instance, our Congress people in Minnesota, all of whom, both senators and all of our Congress people, with the exception of Ilhan Omar, just with one exception, who voted to arm Israel after the International Court of Justice had called it plausible genocide. Okay, so those leaders, this is what Tulsi Gabbard said. She goes, "How can they be planning nuclear war?" This, you know, and so how can they do that? You know what? They think that they will be saved in these underground bunkers.
But
They think they,
hold on, because I think the people need to understand. Let's clarify that she is the director of national intelligence.
yeah,
And I want to clarify for people because people love you as I do. Because you know, just so that you know, Paula, when I reached out to Ms. Rowley today, she said, "Well, am I going to be all by myself? Because I really don't know." I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Everybody loves having you on this show. I love it because I come every time you're on the show. I go back and listen to the segment immediately because I have to learn so much, and we do. Of course, she was the whistleblower um, who really told us, the whole world, about the pre 9/11 failures of the FBI. It didn't have There's so much that could have been done to have prevented that tragedy, and she put her whole career, yes, and I would even say her life on the line to let us know what had happened. And so, Paula, that's who she is. One of Time Magazine's Persons of the Year for 2002. Gives me a lot, boosts me in your eyes, doesn't it? But I'm so glad. And she's up there in Minnesota at AM 950 radio, because I think it's important for people to know who you are because you have so much information. But it's important for us to understand, wait a minute, this is the director of national intelligence.
yes.
I didn't see her on any shows talking about this. I said, wait a minute, did they hear what she said? She said, wait a minute, we're on the brink. But you know what? Tulsi Gabbard, I will give her this. The things about her that I've always liked, that I've always admired. I admire outliers, particularly when I think they're coming from when they come from a place of principle. And I think that she's tried to do that. She's not as free as she was, everybody. When you go into that space, you do give something up to get that high position. That is real. So you can say we can be as critical of Robert Kennedy and Bernie Sanders and others. Yeah, I'm going all over the spectrum. But when you step into these, not just elected office, but when you step into places of leadership, because Colleen Rowley, I've seen it with my own father. You don't have the space. You can't just say everything. You can't just say everything that you know, because that's why I understood the conversation between President Trump and Bob Woodward. When he was talking to him, confiding in him, because everybody knows who Bob Woodward is. You know, naval intelligence assigned to the White House. You got to spill your guts to him before you get out of the presidency. Is that kind of it? Colleen Rowley, is kind of what you have to do. So he confided in Bob Woodward because no one is more deep inside than Bob Woodward. He said, hey, they've got this virus. We don't know what it is. Because just because he's president, everybody doesn't mean that everybody's telling him everything. And now the evidence has shown that a lot of people close into him gave him bad information or wouldn't let him get information at all. that don't personalize this because it's a Game of Thrones up there for everybody. That's just the way it is in a White House. In a power, whenever you have power, that's what happens. And he said, I don't know what this is, and but I do know it's bad. And if I tell the people how bad it is, they won't be able to handle it. People would have gone crazy. You know that, Colleen Rowley. You know the 1929 Depression. People started killing themselves.
Yeah.
So you always have to be careful with this information. But what's amazing to me is that no one has said anything. The director of national intelligence, I mean, Colleen Rowley, I don't, it's above my pay grade, and I don't need to know what she knows, but she knows something.
Yeah.
She's something I think that has made her go, you guys, we got a problem. Am I wrong?
And yeah, this was a couple of days ago, and I think it was just basically a YouTube, and it did get some views, but it's national media did not pick it up. They did not pick it up. And again, the talk about constraints is your media. They have a very narrow parameter of what their bosses allow them to say. And, it's not just Phil Donahue. He's a good example of being
Oh, yeah.
fired for saying the Iraq war was going to turn out bad. But there were a
On the
couple
number one
others
show. On the number
on
one
the
show on
number
the network.
just, and that goes to show you, media power can go away in a very, like, look at me. I was on the cover of Time magazine in 2002. I'm glad that people don't recognize me or anything now. Of course, I've gotten older and I don't really look like the picture, but I'm glad in a way, because I wouldn't want that. It's kind of a burden to have that kind of, if I can understand, I wouldn't want it. On the other hand, when I was well respected, and especially with that cover, then people, oh my gosh, I had every New York Times and all of these media asking my opinion on things, and that is not the case anymore. The latest example is Greta Thunberg, the Swedish climate activist, who was actually, especially for, I would say, on the liberal side, the people who are worried about climate problems, she was very, very, what's the word, praised and respected.
She was
And
lauded all over the
lauded,
world.
yeah. And she was young, so she was this young girl speaking out on whatever. So she was the person of the year also. She was a Time person of the year. And unlike me, I was on with two other women. All three of us were whistleblowers. But Greta Thunberg was on by herself, she was the climate activist. And now, because she went on the flotilla that tried to take humanitarian goods and food into Gaza and got stopped illegally, hijacked by, they were in the high seas and they got illegally stopped by Israel on their way into Gaza. And it was all legal. Everything that they tried to do was legal. But of course, Israel says, we don't care about international law, freedom of the high seas. We don't care about that. Our naval blockade that we can make up anywhere we want is what we care about. And they arrested her, put her in prison for a day or something, Greta Thunberg. And guess what our media is doing? This is the point I was getting to. Even though she was a Time person of the year, highly respected, there are now main media stories calling her names and disparaging her. When she was interviewed in Paris, when she got deported, she was interviewed in Paris, and one of the reporters said, "What do you say about Trump calling you an angry young woman who needs therapy?" Or counseling or something like that. What do you say about Trump calling you an angry young woman who should get psychological help? And she said, we need a lot more angry young women. That was her response back. She's very thoughtful. She was very thoughtful and gave very articulate responses to things. But yet, again, this is how it works, because the power, again, the powers that shouldn't be, which include a lot of our mainstream media. And, today, another good example is, with this veteran who, and I'm going to say divine, I don't know what you would call this, it's kind of like goes around, comes around. He was dying of Agent Orange exposure in Vietnam. That's what he's an older man, but that's what he has. And he has Agent Orange, whatever the consequences of that. He was doused with it in Vietnam. And so him speaking out and then to be attacked by the veterans home itself, who calls the police on this older man who probably has, just a very short time to live. But that's the kind of stuff. We had one of our local media who came to we sent it to a dozen media here. We sent this notice out that this normally a human interest story with a veteran who has a dying wish. These stories are on our news coverage almost every other day, but they have to be pro-war. They have to be slanted to a veteran who was a war hero, or they found some bones from World War II that are coming back to the great-great-grandchildren, or from a deployment and they meet their children. They all have to be pro-war. They can't be a dying veteran who is against the genocide in Gaza and dying of Agent Orange. And we did have one reporter that came, but we don't know if it will air. His bosses, who knows, cross our fingers that we get some coverage out of it. But that kind of skewing of our culture, it's at the root of our problems here in the United States, because everything is narrative. They don't believe in reality anymore. It's nothing is factual. Facts don't matter. It's who you can make afraid or so proud. They call it uber patriotism, or it's like you push emotional buttons on people and then you can control them. Let's go back to the protest, because I think you mentioned briefly that there's a problem in protests many times with what was sometimes called provocateurs and informants that the government is using. Well, obviously, this is also learned from the foreign affairs coups, the regime changes that our CIA and what's the other one? USAID. There's been a bunch of our government agencies that have been involved in overthrowing governments all the way back to the 1950s. And guess how they did it? They did it through, they started with protest, like in the Maidan Square in Ukraine. It started as people out there, we're mad, we want the government, blah, 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 fine, hold your sign, fine. And then all of a sudden, shots are fired, and they can't figure where the shots are fired from. Eventually, in the Maidan Square, and this is what caused the whole coup and the overthrowing of that government in Ukraine in 2014, I think, 2014. They found out that the shots came from the neo-Nazi group that the United States was helping, that we were on their side. So they found that out. There's a lot of evidence now that it didn't come from the protesters. It came from the neo-Nazi side that wanted to overthrow the government in 2014. Guess what? This happened it's happened over and over and over with these regime changes that the United States, again, I'm saying, we do these things in foreign countries, never thinking it's going to come back here and going to be a problem here domestically in the United States. But guess what? The FBI, they have informants. It's well known that they had some informants at the January 1, which they called that an insurrection. Think about Trump. Trump gets caught caught up in double talk all the time, because during January, when he was blamed for the insurrection into the Capitol, and now a few years later, he's using the term insurrection to send out the Marines and the National Guard to go against protesters on immigration and other things. So, I mean, look at how this happens. But I'm just going to say that this is come home, this notion of using protests and somehow if you make the protests violent, then the person in power or in authority obviously has the high ground, because now your protesters are looked at as violent. It also happened during we were protesting in 2008 in St. Paul against the Republican National Convention. Why? Because Bush had started the series of wars in the Mideast, including the Iraq War. He had lied us into Iraq. He was committing a torture program. So a lot of us, about 10,000 people, were protesting in St. Paul. Well, guess what? The police and the government had to turn it violent, and they brought out tanks. We were just walking. Again, we were older people, by and large, mostly older people. There were even some families and whatever, but there was nothing violent about it. Maybe one or two windows got broken, and no one knows who broke those windows. They think, they could have been provocateurs breaking the window. They almost never find who breaks the windows. Mm-hmm. That's a clue right off the bat. And of course, there's cameras everywhere, but I don't think they ever charged anyone with breaking the window. And so there was, I think, a dumpster was overturned. These two young kids got charged with having made Molotov cocktails, but guess what? The leader of the two 20-year-olds who made up their own homemade Molotov cocktails, their leader was an FBI informant. This guy, Darby was his name, Darby. It turned out he was a 30-some-year-old, and he was their leader, telling them to do it. So, I mean, this kind of thing this could be happening now with the protests. So look for it to happen. I mean, I hope it doesn't, but it's definitely a possibility, because then Trump, he can go to the next step. That's right. And say, this is insurrection. Yeah.
But everyone in these movements, that this plays into the hands of your opponents. That's why you don't do it. That's why there was a gentleman, he's passed on now, who was part of what they call the Red Squad. This is the branch of the police who were working with the state's attorney and the FBI. They killed Fred Hampton. They were also sent to kill my father. And Howard Pointer was his name, and he was very public about what had happened. He said, look, this is how we do it. We become your friends. And I was the one who tried to push your father to become violent, or to just to do things. And he said he's so dedicated to nonviolence, and he was so dedicated to doing the right thing that I could never push him. And so it made me change my mind about him. I was given this assignment, and I said, wait a minute. All the people, he and all the people around him, this is not who they are. And I think that's why I'm saying I think we need to be very careful, because right now, when I see this plays into all of these people who want to make this not just a police state, a surveillance state. They won't need the police. Everything you do, and then that's Colleen Rowley. I only have a couple of minutes. I'm going to give them to you. This is social credit scores. They're eliminating the penny. That means they're moving with a quickness toward a cashless society. If you have a cashless society, somebody can determine that you don't have access to your money. You got to push back on this, everybody, because this is insane. Colleen Rowley, the last 2 minutes belong to you, because I think this is so much bigger. That's what we were talking about.
No, it's all entwined. All of these issues are entwined. And I totally agree with you on the money. Actually, even under Biden, they froze bank accounts. They've frozen the bank accounts of the International Criminal Court's prosecutors right now, the United States. So you're basically stealing money. And they did this up in Canada. They froze they took their money, the GoFundMe money. I mean, oh my gosh. Yeah, there's all kinds of power. The powers that shouldn't be can do a lot of things. And yeah, watch out for, I would say, Palantir is the company that is now in charge of, got a contract, a multi-million, maybe more than that, dollar contract in order to categorize people, collect all the information on people, put them into categories, hit lists, this type of thing. And guess who Palantir is led by? Pro-Israel. They've guaranteed so many jobs to Israeli Mossad, etc. I mean, it's incredible. And of
Put
course,
it on social
Trump.
media. They put it
Yeah.
on social media.
Yeah. So and so we got to push back against these things because as again, we're living in a bad time. We are living in a bad time. You just got to hope that people eventually come to their senses. But there's a lot of things going on now. Let's hope nuclear war. But honestly, that's also on the horizon, because if they can't get agreements with Iran and the war in Ukraine, because it's very inciting. You talk about provoking and inciting. That's what it's, inciting violence, the same way a provocateur who breaks a window and says, "Hey, let's go, everyone." That's the same thing that Ukraine has done in bombing the nuclear sites, the nuclear bombers in Russia, which violates the treaty, the START treaty, because their aircraft were out and open. I mean, who thinks these things are good ideas? But that's where we're at.
Colleen Rowley, FBI whistleblower, she told us this is what the FBI could have done. This is where they dropped the ball. And boy, oh boy, did she pay the price for it. But I tell you what, she said the quiet part out loud, and we're all richer for it. We're asking questions, and we're asking more and more questions, everybody, and we should. And we should. Hey, I always like to get the smartest person in the room, and I always get her. Colleen Rowley, may you continue to be strengthened as you go on. What day of the fast is this for you?
21:19 left. It's not too late to join. Look up Vets for Peace, Fast Against Genocide, or Fast for Gaza. It's not, and then you only have to do 19 days. And
Hey.
it's nationwide. It's nationwide.
Everybody, please, please, please pray for them, and and support them. Even if you don't fast, pray with them. Really, because you can imagine these people are being starved, and when they're told that the food has gotten in, that the trucks have gotten through, they're being killed systematically. Boom, boom, boom. Babies are being shot in the head there. I just pray. I just pray. And I pray for California, pray for Chicago, pray for everybody, because people are scared. People are scared. And but we're just on the other side of the rainbow, if you will, everybody. Because now all of the things that we suspected, all of the things that you said, no, you're a conspiracist. Well, now you're finding out that they are all true. So here you are. The next hour, we're going to change our focus a bit. We're going to talk about music. Black History Month, everybody. Black Music History Month with Lindia Johnson. Who is she? She's been on the Grammy board. She's one of the top music coaches, vocal coaches in all of music. I cannot wait for you to hear her story and to hear how you can save the voice. Think about that, everybody. Think about it. Back with more with the Santita Jackson Show in a minute. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.